A new breed of evil has emerged, born of shadow and flesh.
Nephilim.
They are the unclean, and if they are not stopped, they could unravel the very fabric of creation itself.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Deep Talks, where we explore the intersection of religion and culture. I'm really excited for today's episode. What if I told you that there was a brand new fantasy series coming out from the same studio that gave you like X-Men 97 and Invincible, and that this new series was going to be taking inspiration from the biblical book of Genesis and even like apocalyptic literature from the Second Temple period, telling a story about biblical archangels, fallen angels, the Nephilim. Yes, I said the Nephilim. Some of my former students right now are laughing because they know how they could always get me off on a tangent by just bringing up the Nephilim in one of my classes. Yes, this is a real thing. It's totally real, and it's called Gabriel and the Guardians. And I've got the creator of that series here today, and his name is Jason Moody. Jason, thank you so much for joining. I can't wait to hear about this series and hear more about your story.
Oh, yeah. Nice to be on here and officially chatting with you, and I'm excited that you wanted to talk about Gabriel.
Yeah, okay. So I saw a couple trailers for this that just came up on the algo on my YouTube channel.
Yeah.
And at first, like, I didn't actually believe it was real. Like, I couldn't believe this was the sort of thing. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that, again, those that are like biblical studies nerds or into Christian theology, or just have like a fascination even with like Second Temple apocalyptic literature, which has got some wild, fun stuff in it. I couldn't believe that this was actually real. So what is Gabriel and the Guardians? What's it about? And how did you go about creating this story and this series?
Yeah. So yeah, Gabriel and the Guardians is definitely a labor of love that birthed out of a journey that my wife and I have been going on for the last probably half a decade or so, which is, I would say, reconnecting to the sort of the Old Testament, right? I grew up in the church. My dad is a pastor, and I sometime in the late 2000 teens, right? We were given a book about, we were gifted a book that was celebrating the Jewish festivals and feasts, the temple feasts. And I mean, honestly, like, we started practicing Shabbat, and from there we started doing like a yearly Seder. And these were just these practices that growing up in the church, it felt like these lost traditions. And we began to find just tons of life in it, just tons of beauty and life in that. And that all kind of culminated in a moment during COVID, when I had a lot of time on my hands, and we had been practicing these traditions that were, that Second Temple Jews would have been practicing. And then of course that begins to lead you down these interesting paths when you're going, okay, this is what they were doing. What were they reading? Right? Mm-hmm. What were the disciples? What were they nerding out on? Right? And if you do enough digging, you find out, well, they're nerding out on the Book of Enoch, and they were nerding out on these Second Temple, accompanying texts, and so we did too. We started with the Book of Genesis, and just diving deep in the Book of Genesis, and then someone once told me that one of their professors told them that those who are supposed to find the Book of Enoch find the Book of Enoch, and I found the Book of Enoch, and being raised on what I feel is a foundation of the Scripture. I wasn't afraid to dive into it and kind of allow it to inform from a context standpoint a little bit of how these men that I'd read about all my life, how they would have been seeing the world, the worldview that they would have had.
Yeah.
and the spiritual landscape that they would have understood. And then you start finding it in their writings. You begin to find Enochian ideas in their writings, right? And so anyway, all of that sort of congealed into this moment in COVID when, my day job didn't have a lot for me to do. And I began to uncover this beautiful narrative that is sort of laden in Genesis about the giants that walked the earth, and this Genesis 6 narrative, right? And I started imagining, this is such a fascinating narrative. You know what I mean? It's so weird and like cool. And how is it that I grew up in the church and didn't hear this in Sunday school? Where were the giants in the story of Noah in Sunday school? Kids would have loved it. I would have loved
Totally.
it. Why wasn't that a part of that story? And as I began to go, I'm going to tell my kids about it. And I'm going to do it the only way I know how, which is by drawing characters and telling them the story through this wild story, the way that I'm seeing it, that just began to burst something. You know what I mean? As I'm drawing giants and I'm drawing Noah the way I imagined him, I'm drawing, literally sketching out a antediluvian, Sumerian version of Noah, because if you really look into it, like most likely Noah was right. His father was a idol maker for Nimrod, right? Like we're talking he was raised in Sumerian culture, early Sumerian culture. Yeah. But am I diving too quickly into the weeds?
No, let's do it. That's what we're here for, Jason.
All of that began to coalesce right into me creating this kind of picture of the Noah story that eventually my daughter, who was like 15 at the time, was like, if this was a show about the Bible, I'd actually watch it. And I just felt the Lord kind of put a thumb in my back and was like, yeah, like, this needs to be told. Like, this is something that and I'm looking for some creators to tell my stories in a way that they've not really been told before, to recover some ancient mysteries and truths that have somewhat been lost in media. Right. And that's kind of where it all started. So to answer your question, what is Gabriel and the Guardians? Well, Gabriel and the Guardians has become a fantasy interpretation of the narrative of Genesis, but it is set in a fantasy world that's inspired by Sumerian, Mesopotamian, and particularly Hebrew culture, mythos, myth, and lore.
Dude, I can't even believe we're talking about this. I'm so excited because for years, I think a lot of people, it's just cool to even hear your journey into this, because I think a lot of people that grew up in church traditions and Christian traditions similar to what we grew up in, Jason, you get to a point where you've sat through all the sort of Sunday school stories, and there was kind of, in hindsight, I look back on it, and there was this real modernist way of engaging with the scriptures, and I was in a deeply charismatic context that was totally fine in many ways with things that we would dub as supernatural. Yeah. We had no problem with that stuff. But the way we engaged with the world of the Old Testament, especially in the Hebrew Bible, was really like anachronistic.
Yeah.
So we weren't stepping into the worldview of the biblical authors, right, and the original audience. It was like it seems like in many ways, like when it comes to biblical hermeneutics, we were doing something that feels like really American. Right. When I go someplace to a foreign country, I expect everybody to speak English and to get my customs, right? That's a real like American attitude. Instead of when I step into that biblical world, like acknowledging this is a weird foreign place to us. Yep. You mentioned like ancient Sumerian culture and the culture of the ancient Near East. If I was just a historian studying that stuff and studying those texts, I wouldn't go in expecting me to be able to have a flat reading of those stories, right? So I hear in your journey, Jason, something that is similar to my own journey, where I was like, all right, I'm getting older here. I'm going to start engaging with the Bible more deeply, because either I got to get serious about my own faith, or I'm going to have to take a different path, right? And so first I started by getting like, I'm going to get serious with the biblical text in a way that I've never done before. And it got me into the world, the strange, foreign world of the biblical authors, especially when you go to texts like Genesis 6,
Yeah.
which you brought up. And I can distinctly remember the time of my life where I first sat down and I was like, I'm going through the Bible in a year or something like that in college. And I get to Genesis 6. I'm like, oh yeah, I kind of remember this is the flood story. Whoa. What is this? Sons of God and daughters of men and the Nephilim? What is this? Why did nobody told me about this?
Yeah. It's a rabbit hole, but it's like a beautiful rabbit hole, right? I think that the question I think you hit is the same question I hit, which is authorship, the author, the authority of the writer.
Yeah.
And how much of that comes from their worldview and intentionality, right? What did the writer intend for me to understand? Not what am I bringing to the text, but what did the author bring to the text? And I have to enter into his world, not him into mine, because he had no conception of my world, right? The writer of Genesis didn't understand modern day Christianity. He had zero context for that. And so my job, if I really want to know my Bible, is to actually shed modern Christianity, at least the way I understand it, and understand the writer's worldview as best as I can, right? We can't fully do it because I'm not him. But what I can do is my job is to, as best I can, enter into his world and what did he mean when he wrote the things he wrote. And so when he writes something like a phrase, B'nai Elohim, right? I can't bring what I think that means. I can't. And I have to try to understand, what did he mean by that? What did he mean when he said sons of God? Did he mean a tribe? Or did he mean celestial beings that came from the stars, right? And if you dig deep enough, I think you find that there's no way that he meant tribe, not from his worldview.
No,
that's
the sort of thing where I felt like sometimes you would get to scholarly approaches that felt so modernist that they were excluding from the very worldview of a people that had no bifurcation between supernatural and natural. That's a foreign concept to the world of an ancient Near Eastern person. They're not having those dividing lines. And so when we go into that text and we see something like B'nai Elohim translated most oftentimes as the sons of God, and we go, well, that just has to be earthly kings. Like I can respect in some ways that interpretation, but it seems to me that I'm forcing a modernist reading on that text when I step back and I go, this is an enchanted world. We are living in the secular age in a world that has been disenchanted. And so we have trouble with that idea of like an engagement with spirit, what we would call spiritual principalities, powers. A new term getting floated around these days is non-human intelligences. We are very offended by that idea. And I think if I'm going to be honest in engaging with the text, I have to let down my own offenses and be like, what if that is the reading? And you're right. It seems, whether it's Michael Heiser or John Walton, Tremper Longman III, we've got all these great scholars, even in our own like evangelical neighborhood, that are saying, no. This is strange. It should feel a little bit upsetting and disorienting, right?
Well, I think that, 100%. I think that we want to apply this, this enlightened way of looking at the world. Like we live in an enlightened age and surely we know more than they did. Surely we do. I just think what a prideful way to come at the writer, right? They're the writer. So I'm not, right? So to think that I know more than they do about the world just because I live in a science forward age, it's not authentic, right? There's a problem with it. And it's not that knowledge is the problem. It's that, we think we're somehow more, I don't know, like we deserve to be the ones to hold the keys to the truth. And we don't.
Yeah, we're prejudiced to think that, and there's like all sorts of Enlightenment ideas. There might even be some Hegelian influence here in our thinking that the further away we get from the past, the more likely we are to be right about the world. And so we impose that on the authors and the text in a way
Which is flawed, right? The further you get away from the text and the culture of the text, the more likely that we're bringing something that wasn't intended.
Yeah.
It's just true. Like, you know what I mean? Like the further you get away. And so I think that, so all that to say, like my goal, like once you start thinking, once you start going, okay, well, who am I to bring anything to this outside of a willingness to want to understand it, right? That's all I should be bringing.
Absolutely. And I think the thing that's hard, Jason, is like, I sit down and we should probably, because we're speaking as people who have grappled with that text and its connections to Second Temple literature. And there's probably people that are tuning in and watching or listening to this right now. They're just like, hey, I just saw there's this new anime coming out from the studios that made X-Men 97. So we should probably talk about that text and its connection for a moment. But I do think to speak to maybe more of that Christian audience, because there were people, I did a reaction to one of the more recent trailers and some really great comments, but I did get a lot of comments I noticed from people who are in Christian communities that are saying, man, I have a really hard time with this because this stuff, you're saying this stuff isn't actually in the Bible. And I think one of the things I just want to speak to is this sense that when we come to the text, the biblical text, I think it's okay to be unsettled. Like we can say, I want to do my due diligence to discern the authorial intent. I want to understand what this text means to that author and its audience. And I'm just going to let it say that without moving into, well, the application to my life. Because I think the kind of like normal hermeneutic of my cultural upbringing, Jason, has been kind of this like Bible as a magic fortune cookie thing. Here's your verse for the day. And when you pick it up and read it, you should instantly be able to just apply it to your life. And so when I read a Genesis 6, I can get to the Noah story and like derive some immediate application to that. But the stuff leading up to that, like the backstory that's leading to the flood, if I go looking for like, what's the immediate application, and I find something that's strange, foreign, and frankly, I'll just be honest, it's disgusting. Like it's a disgusting idea. So what I want to encourage people to do as we continue this conversation, don't jump with a biblical text into your application to your life right away. We got to figure out what it means first. And unless we want to just make the Bible into some like Rorschach test, if that's the case, we put 100 people in a room, just throw up the Rorschach test of, well, what does this verse mean to you? And we get 100 different applications. If we're actually going to find something of meaning, we've got to be fine with the foreignness, the strangeness. So Jason, can we talk a little bit about, we've been talking a bit as insiders here about Genesis 6. What is Genesis 6, that kind of like backstory leading into the one that I think most people are familiar with, even if they haven't ever spent time in church? Most people kind of know the general Noah story. But there's something leading up to that, and it's connected to Second Temple literature like Enoch, and it's connected to your series and show. Can you kind of just piece that together for audiences that may be less familiar with that text and why it's influencing the creation of this new show and series?
I think that what's going on with first, I just want to say, like, the Bible Project, I think, does this very well, right? Tim Mackey and John Collins, and what they do is they get into the meat of it, but ultimately they're looking at Genesis, and they're going, there are themes here that are actually even like, what is that book trying to say? What is it trying to tell us about the story of humanity, right? And so as I was looking at the book of Genesis, I was finding so much beauty in the story of redemption, which I think is really this is a story about a father who is unrelenting in his desire to create a path forward for a for heirs, right? For a group of people that he created as heirs to his kingdom that continually like seem to want to just like derail themselves from that. And he's continually going, hey, look, even though you've kind of sidelined and you've walked over here, I'm going to create a new path from where you're at. Here's the path, and they diverge from that path. And he goes, okay, fine, fair enough. I will forge a new path for you toward the destiny that I created you for, right? Toward this rule and reign ship that I destined you for from the beginning. And so that was despite what you think about the Nephilim and the fallen, like the idea that what does it look like to create a story that tells the narrative of people that were created with destiny, stepped away from that destiny, and the great lengths that their creator would go to reconnect them to that destiny. And to me, that's the bigger story. And so I guess to answer your direct question, this started as a story that I saw in Noah was an easy access point, right? Like you look at Noah and everybody knows Noah. And so it started there. But as I started to get into it, and then you want to find what are the accompanying stories? It's hard to move. It's hard to not bring in the book of Enoch, right? It's really hard, which I think is what you were saying. Like, why the book of Enoch? Why does that have so much of a part to play in this story? Why not just Genesis? And I think it's because, I really, when I started looking at the story of Noah, and that piece looms so large of these beings that came and derailed humanity from its destiny. If you want to know more about that, even the Second Temple Hebrews are going, well, they wanted to know more about that. They went to the book of Enoch to find more out. And when you get there, you find this interesting story about these archangels. Like that was the fascinating part to me, is that the archangels played a role in that story. And so what started as a story about Noah moved into this story about what if you could tell biblical themes and narratives from the perspective of spiritual beings. What does it look like to tell the story of Noah, but through the lens of Michael or Gabriel? And what would have their experience been, as they see that story play out? And then inevitably you begin to go, okay, that's a big undertaking. And how do I tell this story without people feeling like we're trying to teach something about the Bible?
Right.
Is that something I don't think we wanted to do? I want to make people ask questions about the Bible. Good art inspires questions. It doesn't dictate answers. Right. And so, moving it out of literal biblical, we're telling a literal biblical story, an actual historical, moving that over to Once Upon a Time, that felt like the right move. That felt like a move that freed us up a little bit to really explore the themes rather than just try to tell the story and then like dance around. Oh, that didn't happen. This didn't happen. You took a liberty here. You took a liberty there. We just wanted to be like, no. Our heart is actually to explore and make people ask questions about these themes. Not necessarily ask whether or not we got it right in interpreting the Bible. That became less interesting. I don't know if I answered.
No, that's good. I mean, frankly, from a vantage point, I do think, despite like really noble efforts by I think a lot of people to put on to the big screen or the small screen portrayals of whether stuff from the Hebrew Bible or the New Testament that are trying to give what we might consider like historical representation of the texts in a way that feels literal.
Yeah.
I don't think we ever actually get that anyways.
No,
there's always an interpretive lens from the show creator, from the people representing that. You
always.
can't actually get that anyway. So I have a greater appreciation for the sort of things you're doing. I think about even the Russell Crowe movie Noah,
Yeah.
and that was strange and foreign. It was such a deviation from a like Sunday school reading of that text, but it brought in these things like you kind
They
of
really tried. I did not. I actually thought it got to some extent undeserved hate from a Christian audience that just hadn't been able to fully grasp the source material that I think that they were coming from.
Source material is a great word, because I think that's what I noticed in these trailers that got me so excited. And my own daughter, she draws all the time, and she's really influenced by the anime art style. And it's actually just hard to find stuff in that world that we feel is like formative in a positive direction in her life. So I was just excited on that front. But when you say source material, that's what I'm getting at here, is like you're building a world out of source material that I think a lot of people are unfamiliar with.
Yeah.
So they may read a Genesis 6 and they go, I have no idea what to do with the sons of God took the daughters of men and produced the Nephilim, the great men of renown. And they don't know what kind of other source material makes that idea not foreign to the original audience. And that's something I want to be clear in highlighting here. I love reading the book of Enoch. I wouldn't be making an argument that Enoch should be part of the Christian canon. But what I would suggest for people is that you're not even going to understand interactions. Like, here's a great one from the New Testament. I don't think you can understand Jesus's interaction with the Gadarenes demoniac. So there was the man, or men, depending on which gospel, who was possessed by demons. Jesus confronted him. This is the story where the demons cry out, "We are legion, for we are many." And when they specifically ask Christ not to do, is they specifically ask him, "Do not throw us into the abyss. Have you come here to throw us into the abyss before our appointed time?"
Yeah.
That doesn't make any sense at all outside of you getting what would have been normative source material for that original audience. And you have to go to a place like Enoch.
Yeah.
And in the story of Enoch, you have this announcement of someone called the Son of Man, which is really interesting.
It's shockingly messianic.
Yes. And we should be clear that it's not written. There's no indication that this is a book written by Enoch. But it is still probably at least 200 years, written 200, maybe 2 to 3 centuries before Christ. There's heavy messianic themes that are using language that Son of Man, yes, was in the book of Daniel. There's clear connection here. And the Son of Man is coming to do what? The Son of Man comes in Enoch to, we get the backstory of what you could say is kind of like the extended edition of Genesis 6, maybe the director's cut.
Yeah, I'm like, man, the book of Enoch is sort of the Silmarillion.
There you go.
Of Genesis.
Yeah. And so you get in this Silmarillion Genesis 6 story, the fall of these angels, and they've come and they do. And this is the weird and foreign, and it's frankly the gross part that I don't know how to make sense of, other than maybe a more like literary sense of it. They do mate with women and they produce these giants.
Well, real quick, I think that the point there is that they are confiscating the God dictated blessing of procreation, right? To men, right? What I think they're doing is they are hijacking, right? This thing that God set for man to do, right? Which was to basically procreate, to God made us in his image. And then he said, and you can now make more in my image, and it will be in your image, right? In your image, in my image. And this is something that I think that we see this story of these beings that is of high value, this ability to procreate. And so however, again, how would the writer at that time understand beings that come and basically take the genetics of mankind and create something that looks like other men? It's distilled into the worldview that they had, but what it is it's a story about beings that aren't us, that are somehow taking our genetics and creating other beings that kind of look like us, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's, I think the point, hijacking what God made for man, right?
Yeah. So the
The
Son of Man in Enoch plays
Yeah.
this important role as coming from heaven to earth to essentially bring judgment on the fallen angels.
Yeah.
And the fallen angels and the spirits of the deceased Nephilim. And so when we get to the New Testament, this is a thing that's alien and foreign to a lot of people. But when you see demons mentioned in the New Testament and you see demon possession in the New Testament, which you don't see in the Hebrew Bible, it is something new.
Yep.
You have to realize those people aren't scratching their head going, well, what are demons?
Yeah.
You know, like they know based on, it's kind of like, I've often compared it to, you know, if for, you know, there's a lot of weird stuff with, you know, drones over New Jersey and things like that going on in the news.
Yeah.
But for my generation who was raised on, you know, like Independence Day, for example.
Yeah.
If you saw some sort of huge spacecraft descend on New York City, you would have an ability to identify what that is, even though you've never seen it, because you've had stories in your culture like at Independence Day, which have told you this sort of stuff. And in the same way, those original audiences hearing Jesus cast out the demons from the demoniac at Gadarenes, they're not scratching their head going, what are demons? The Second Temple literature, like Enoch, is pointing us to the story of, well, the demons are the spirits of these Nephilim after they've deceased that are roaming the world. It's strange. It's foreign to us. I don't know what to make of it, like ontologically.
Right.
You know, if people ask me,
your point is that what's happening there is that the gospel writers are using shorthand idioms.
Yeah.
Right. Like the way you might when you say UAP.
Right.
But someone 100 years from now may not get those three letters, and that they may have to do digging and put themselves into your worldview to understand when you say something like NHI, right? Non-human intelligence. The gospel writers are doing the same thing. They're using shorthand scriptural idiom, right? When they say something like, when Jesus uses the phrase like unclean in reference to those spirits, unclean spirits, unclean has a meaning. It has a context, right? It actually connects to the idea of something born out of two things that shouldn't come together, right? Like if you go into the Old Testament, and something that was unclean was when you've got two things that were basically unlawful to have them be mixed. A lot like, human and, mortal and celestial, the mixing of mortal and celestial blood, right?
Yeah.
This is an unclean mixture. And so it makes sense to me, at least, that Jesus would call those spirits unclean. To me, that's a hyperlink, right? To something that we're supposed to then discover. It's really fun to discover it. But I think to your point though, like, Jude is doing the same thing. Jude is making lots of references that are assuming the audience understands, or at least has somewhat read the Book of Enoch. You have to, that's the only that's the only access point that you have when you're reading Jude. Otherwise, it's like, what is Jude? What is he talking about here?
Can you bring people in, like specifically in Jude? What would be an example of something, talked about in Jude that you're hinting at here?
So Jude talks about the days of Noah, right? It talks about it literally says that there are these principalities or beings that have been imprisoned under the earth, and that's a direct reference to what happened in the Book of Enoch when the four archangels are sent by God. And they imprison the watchers and under the earth, right? And Jude makes direct reference to that. And so I think that you have to have that. I guess you don't have to have it, but it helps to have that context. And is there another? Maybe I'm missing another piece to that.
No, that's great. I was thinking about, I was trying to pick up some of those other references. I'm actually thinking, it might even be Second Peter, For if God did not spare the angels who sinned, but cast them down to Tartarus.
Yeah.
So, it's not actually Hades there.
Right.
So we have three words for hell in the New Testament. We've got Gehenna, which is the one Jesus most often uses,
Right.
which refers to the Valley of Hinnom. The Valley of Hinnom was the place after the Babylonian conquest of Jerusalem, where they took the dead bodies to be stacked and burned. But it's also the place where, before the Babylonian conquest, Israel was sacrificing their own children to idols in the Valley of Hinnom, and that's Gehenna. You also have Hades, and Hades is just kind of like, it's the Sheol. Sheol was the word for the place of the underworld in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew Bible. But then you have, in this specific instance, you have Tartarus, which is, if you know your Greek mythology, you know what Tartarus is, and you kind of get that this language maybe has some like crossover appeal throughout the Mediterranean world. There's something here about this story that is familiar, not even just to the Jewish audience, but I think there's elements of this that has crossover appeal to that Greco-Roman world that has these similar, I'm not saying they're the same, but thematically similar stories of a fall of, they would have called them gods or titans, and then them being imprisoned.
Or Elohim, right?
Or Elohim.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
And I think I'm wrong. So I actually was thinking of Second Peter specifically. Jude just actually straight up quotes the book of Enoch.
That's it. That was it. Yep, that was it. Okay, so some people might go, all right, well, I saw some of the comments on my video. They're like, yeah, even people listening to this might go, shouldn't we just stick to like the bread and butter stuff?
Yeah.
And I understand that. But I think what you're doing, and I'm really excited about this show, is it is helping people imagine better the source material of the biblical world. But to me, it also does get at an important theme that you've already hinted at in breaking down the thematic elements of the book of Genesis. And it gets to something that I actually misinterpreted in the trailer. There's a line in the trailer where I believe it's from Gabriel saying something about, we have to protect the seed. Now I misheard that and went off on a rant about, I thought it was saying you must protect the sea. And then I got into ancient Near Eastern stuff, and everybody in the comments corrected me, thankfully, and said, no, it's saying seed. We must protect the seed.
Yeah.
What is that all about, Jason? Is that a central feature, not to spoil anything for the forthcoming series, but is that a central plot point and feature? And how is that connected to your reading of the scriptures and the biblical story?
Yeah. So Gabriel, pulling from there's a part in the book of Enoch that talks about Gabriel, that Gabriel was over Eden, that he was given he was over Eden and the serpents and the cherubim, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And so, taking from that, and again, we're our goal is to go, we're doing once upon a time, right? We want to make this a parable, and Jesus did this himself, right? He articulated Old Testament truth, Torah truth, by telling parables, right? But he would actually still use Torah imagery too, right? He would use things like he tells the story of the man that's in Sheol, right, and looking up, right, and so he would use imagery, but he would tell a parabolistic story. He was go, once upon a time. If you want to know the kingdom of God, let me tell you this: once upon a time, there was a man who owned a field, right? And so I think that part of the idea is like, can we move over to that? But
the seed. Why is Gabriel saying we have to protect the seed? How does that connect?
Yeah. So the seed, Gabriel is we decided to run with this idea that Gabriel was given guardianship over Paradem, which is our version of Eden, right? And part of that is protecting the seeds of the tree eternal. Right. And that's our version of the tree of life. Right. The tree of life has huge imagery all throughout the Bible. I mean, trees in general have a big part in our story. And trees, the Bible Project has a whole series on trees and the of the Bible. Right. And so, if you go to Revelation, the tree of life is connected to Christ himself, right? And so the seed, there's a lot of imagery that the seed of the tree of life has for us. And so the seed, I think one very simple idea is this is the gospel, right? The gospel, the good news of what it is that our Creator has done for us, and the great lengths that he has and will continue to go for us is all encapsulated in the idea of the gospel. And so I think that it's easy to look at the seed, right, and say, okay, that is in the actual parable, the seed is, that the farmer is planting, you could say, is the gospel. And so, and he says, he spreads it on different parts of the, it's not really, he's actually spreading it and not really worrying too much about where it goes.
Yeah.
But so anyway, yes, the seed in actual, literal terms within the context of our story, this is a very powerful, seed of the tree eternal. Yeah.
And so the seed needs to get protected. What role then in your story does instantly jumped out at me right away in the trailer is the presentation of the Nephilim. They're explicitly mentioned with that. You're using a lot of new language, fantasy, names, new scene, new places that have a allegorical representation for things that might be in the biblical story or in creation. But when it comes to the big baddies that seem to be out there, you explicitly call them Nephilim.
Yeah.
In your story, what are the Nephilim doing? Without spoiling anything, obviously, but what are the Nephilim doing, and why maybe are they presenting a threat to the seed?
Yeah. So we're dancing a fine line, obviously, right? Because we're telling a fictional interpretation, right, of a narrative. But I also think that there are these iconic sort of nearly mythic, not mythical, I'm not, but mythic, right? Iconic and legendary beings, right? That transcend even culture. So I think that archangels, Michael and Gabriel and Uriel, these are characters that are they don't just show up in Christian mythology and text. They show up in other cultures. And so these sons of, God, if you will, the offspring of, celestial beings, right? They show up in multiple places too. And so, again, dancing that fine line, the Nephilim just felt like such a mythic idea that we wanted to just directly use that phrase and that word. And so what are they there to represent? I think that they are there to represent the attempt to thwart the authority of mankind, the mortals, what it was so so I'm going to lay this out. So what's the backstory to our story? Aya, who is our creator, the author of all things, he created this world of Ara, right? And these are all laden with the Hebrew meaning, right? So if you know, you know. But and then the mortals were created to learn how to take care and they were given the authority to tend to these seeds that could expand the kingdom and the garden, if you will. So Ea creates this unmade planet, right? Essentially, this unmade planet that is essentially a desert wasteland, right? We call it a wild and waste, the wild and waste of Ara, right?
Little tohu wabohu imagery there.
Yeah. So, and it says it at the very beginning of the episode. We have a voiceover that's like it's the wild and waste of Ara, and in the midst of that, Ea plants an oasis, right, where he then takes them to first mortals, and he begins to teach them how to take care of that oasis. These seeds are what would then terraform the rest of the planet. He left it unmade for them to have the purpose of then co-laboring in bringing about the fruition of the fruitfulness of the planet, right? Of Ara. And they are that destiny, that beautiful thing of co-laboring with Ea himself to bring to fruition the beauty that he started for them and showed them how to do it, right? It's thwarted, right? It's taken. Their birthright is stolen from them. They sell it for a bowl of soup, if you will. And so then at that point, those seeds are extremely important, because these seeds are what can finish the work of basically turning this wasteland planet into a fruitful planet, into a planet that is a beautiful, full of life. Which is, if you look at Genesis, exactly what God gave Adam and Eve the authority to do, which was go and rule and reign and subdue the earth, right? And that word subdue is actually closer to bringing to full fruitfulness, right? Rather than what we think about of like really like
domination.
Yeah. It's actually really about making it be as fruitful as possible.
Yeah, stewardship.
Right? Stewardship, right? Yeah. Governing. And so all of the imagery is designed to bring this idea of what's it look like when someone who was given the destiny to be a king, right? But they are tricked out of it. What, again, I go back to what great lengths would their creator, would their father go to reconnect them to their destiny? And that's the story, right? And so these seeds play an important part, because the mortals of Ara are actually gifted 12 seeds, even though the paradise is taken from them. it actually has to, because the source of life is there, and if that's corrupted, everything's lost. So that has to be removed. But Ea graciously actually leaves them 12 seeds. But when we pick up the story, they haven't done what they were supposed to do with these 12 seeds. Instead of using these 12 seeds to finish the work, they've jealously killed and tried to dominate each other to obtain these seeds from each other. They split, they fractured and factioned and created all of these warring tribes that are all just trying to hoard the seeds, right? They just want them because they represent power. They don't understand, or at least they've lost the knowledge that if they were to work together, if they were to utilize these seeds the way they were designed to be, they could actually bring complete peace and prosperity to the planet. So that's a...
Dude, this is brilliant. Okay. So I got to ask a question maybe about more process-wise, because I'm hearing this, and this is... I'm getting Tolkien, I'm getting C.S. Lewis, I'm getting, Milton, Paradise Lost, all of this stuff.
Absolutely.
And it's all you are telling without this. Oh, it's beautiful, man. I can't wait to see this because you are telling the biblical story.
Yeah.
You're telling like the overarching biblical story in a way that I think is an incredibly high level of synthesis. So when you talk about like the right ordering of God, bringing about a creation where there's an intended telos for that creation, and his functional ordering of that creation looks like humanity playing a specific role. John Walton, I think, uses the term like co-regents or vice regents.
Yes, viceroys, if you will.
Yeah, and then when we do that, the cosmos functions as it was intended to. It's going with the grain of God's intended order for reality.
Yeah.
But there is something like you just can't make sense of the biblical story if you picture God as like this micromanager.
Yeah.
Because there's this like turning over of responsibility.
Right.
And that turning over of responsibility, there are deep layers, not just from this like narrative standpoint, but from an existential standpoint, where I, as a human, I see in that story a calling of purpose and destiny for me to participate
Yeah.
in this like co-shaping of creation towards its telos with God.
Dude, that's it. The cosmic participation that we've been invited into. Accepting Christ isn't, dude, it's not just about going to heaven, right?
No.
It is about understanding that you are a immortal being who was created with purpose and destiny, and that this beautiful God of ours, this creator, this father, just like I want to give my sons, I don't want them to just exist in whatever I am making. I want to find ways to bring them into the function and role,
Yes.
and give them responsibility within that. Like, that's my good pleasure. It would actually be a disservice to them to just let them like just be and like just watch TV. You know what I mean? Like, no, it's about helping them, bringing them to work with me. You know what I mean? And even if my work doesn't require them yet, right? Like my job isn't, I want to bring them to work with me, and they're too little to really affect any kind of change in my work environment. But what I'm doing is I'm showing them and I'm teaching them, I'm getting them comfortable with the roles and responsibilities so that one day when they're ready, they can step into the authority that I have designed for them. Right.
Yeah, because you're longing to see them flourish.
I'm longing to see them flourish.
And it's the connection that comes when you bring your kids to work with you.
Yeah.
It's not that you're actually giving them the job and you need them to accomplish it.
Right.
But that is a mode of deep connection where we get to participate together in something that lifts us up.
Yeah.
You know, this is so deeply intertwined with, I mean, I can go so many different places here, Jason, from throughout the ages of historic Christian theology. I mean, I think of whether it's Augustine, and what you're talking about here is that we've been created out of the good to participate with the good. And what sin is not creating some new category of evil, but it's our misuse of the good. So when you talk about 12 seeds, given to humanity that was intended to be used towards the direction of the good, but instead they misuse, they pervert the good. This is like 101 historic Christian theology for what sin is, instead of just like, personal breaking of some arbitrary set of rules.
Right. No, that we really wanted to find a way to visualize the idea of sin in a way that didn't just feel like a boogeyman, or like that didn't just feel like it's about you just following rules and you did the bad thing. Are you naughty or nice? Right? Are you on the naughty list or are you on the nice list? It's not. It actually has nothing to do with that. It has everything to do with, are you going to partner with the ordering, right? The what creation is, what the 7 days, the 6 days of creation, and then the seventh, we live in the seventh day. We live in the ongoing ordering of the cosmos. And yet there is something that wants to move into the disorder. Something wants to disorder it, right?
Totally.
Do you
just
partner
look around.
with the disorder or the order, right?
Yeah. Just look around. I mean, I think there's plenty of evidence for those that even might be watching this that err on the agnostic side, or maybe towards atheism. And I'm glad you're here watching, but I do think most people, even in those camps, don't have a hard time believing in evil.
Yeah.
They don't have a hard time believing in.
That's kind of the easier one, right?
It is. It is easier. It seems more evidential. And this is awesome. Jason, I want to pivot because I'm really, I could spend all day on the theology side, but I'm also super curious. I want to get back to this question of like inception here. The inception of this idea. How does it go again? So you said you wanted to tell this story, make the Bible come alive, the biblical narrative come alive for your kids in a fresh way. How do you go from that to this, where you've got, I mean, I think some apt comparisons here. You got like it's my kids would say it's giving. Yeah, that's like the term.
Yeah.
It's giving like Narnia and Dragon Ball vibes.
Yeah.
How do you go from that? And you've got like the voice actors that like from the Clone Wars and other and like incredible anime voice actors.
Yeah, Vash the Stampede from Trigun and Ichigo of Bleach, and
How does that go from inception of an idea to like, maybe I'll tell my kids a story, I'll draw up some designs, character designs to this?
Yeah. So, I mean, man, honestly, it's just been a story of being truly convinced that this was something that I was supposed to do. As a kid, I wanted to make cartoons, man. I really did. I truly believed I would. Like, I honestly was like, I mean, I tell a story of like when I was in college, I would, when I needed, when I was out of money, right? I would like create little dollar bills of like Colossal dollars, which is the name of our animation studio. I would make Colossal dollars and be like, look, I'll give you this Colossal dollar if you buy me a Wendy's burger. And one day, I was going to be worth so much because I was really convinced that I was going to do this thing.
You created cryptocurrency, Jason.
Yeah, the first cryptocurrency. And so, but like I don't know, I'm from the Midwest, right? So like, it's hard to access this industry. It really is, especially, in the early 2000s, late 90s. I mean, it was just, it was so insulated. It was before really pre-internet. I mean, I was raised in the internet, but like it hadn't taken hold the way it has now, right? Access to people and into knowledge wasn't quite there. And so I got to a place where I was just like I really gave it a go. I tried my hand at like indie comics and I thought maybe that would be my route. But I got to my mid-20s and I was married and I had a kid on the way and I was like, I gotta get a real job. You know what I mean? Like I gotta get a job that actually pays money. Mm-hmm. And so I ended up getting into e-learning and, that was fine. It was great. And because of that, I ended up going into, serving more in my church and I ended up, doing worship and becoming a worship leader. And so I led worship for, years and years and years. And my day job was, making interactive, innovative e-learning for JP Morgan Chase, right? So that's what I was doing, man. Like I've
done some of that too, Jason. I've done some e-learning stuff. Yep.
Yeah, man. So in 2020, I was in the midst of that and I was fine with it. I was very like, we were
2020 was the year to do that.
Yeah. And so when COVID hit, going into work shut down. And so like, in a lot of ways, like the work that we had just kind of slowed down. So like I had a lot of free time, to be honest. Like I'm sure that somebody from JP Morgan Chase may be watching this and was like, oh, this kid, what was this dude doing? He wasn't working. No, there was definitely for a few months, like none of us were really all working. There was just not much work. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, also what I had been doing on a weekly basis, which was gathering in a space and leading people into worship, and then gathering on a monthly space and creating a very art-focused space to facilitate worship. That all kind of stopped, right? We couldn't gather. And so I just had a lot of creative energy that wasn't being spent anywhere. You know what I mean? And so when you have that much energy, you start making stuff. And that's what I did, as I said before. And I started out just making stuff from the kids. Honestly, I was just drawing and telling them stories, but it began to coalesce into something. And it came this moment where I really felt like pressed to like make it, to make something. Like it had congealed into something that felt like worthwhile. And honestly, I was skeptical because I'm like, I tried this in my 20s and failed. You know what I mean? Like, yep. and I squared with where I landed. You know what I mean? I buried this dream in my 20s. And honestly, I'm not joking. I felt like the Lord said, that's fine. I never told you to bury that. So here's a shovel. We're going to go dig it up and raise it from the dead because I never told you to bury that dream. And I was like, okay, Lord, like, don't hurt my feelings. You know what I mean? Like, please, I don't know if I can handle doing all this and then it not panning out. But I trusted him. I said, okay, let's do it, And honestly, it's just been, it's just been the favor to not be afraid to just go. And I didn't know the rules. I didn't know that you couldn't cold message people on LinkedIn and just be like, hey, I made this thing. Here's my pitch deck. You know what I mean? Like, would you look at it? Like, I didn't know at the beginning that I wasn't allowed to just kick over fence posts just to see if they would stand up. You know what I mean?
Okay,
like,
so you have designs here.
Yeah.
Right? Do you have a story written? Like, what do you have that you're bringing to people?
So what happened was I had this idea and I went, okay, what am I supposed to do with this? And I just felt in my gut, make a pitch deck. And so I was like, okay, I don't really know what a pitch deck is, but I work in e-learning, so I can, I have an idea of how to make things.
Yep.
So I just looked around on the internet to see what pitch decks were. I looked them up. I found like you can actually very easily the pitch deck that the Duffer Brothers created for Stranger Things. It's super easy to find. So you can go out there and just like look it up and you'll find it. And so I did. That's what I did. I went and found a bunch of pitch decks for shows that were public, and I just based mine on that, like, and used my knowledge of making e-learning to do like, okay, well, I actually think I can do this a little better. You know what I mean? Like this pitch deck's a little, the whole idea, if e-learning, the whole idea is taking big concepts and distilling them down into
learning targets,
digestible content, right?
Yep.
And so, I was like, I can do this. Like I can do that. And so that's what I did. I went and looked up pitch decks, used that as a base, kind of a starting point, and created my own pitch deck. And then I just started sending it out to any producer I could find an email for, or anybody who would add me on LinkedIn, or if they hadn't set their settings correctly and you could just message them without them adding, I would, I'd take that liberty. And you got to be ready to just not care if someone says no. Like, I mean, if you're like, you can't let that get you down. And so I just looked at every no as like, well, statistically, statistically, I'm more likely to get a yes next time, because you can't get no's forever. Every time you get one, you are statistically more likely to get a yes, right? And so I just based it on that, man. I sent out hundreds and hundreds of messages. Eventually I had someone that was like, I'll take a look at your pitch deck. Producer was like, I'll take a look at it. And that producer put me in contact with who is currently our showrunner, David Cunningham. And then David Cunningham put me in brought in who is our head of production, and he had worked his name. So David Cunningham is our showrunner and head writer. And then he had a connection to Al Moore, who had worked at Disney, in production, on Mulan and Lion King and, Brother Bear and Lilo and Stitch and all, just all these great movies. And he read our script and was like, how do I be a part of this? I want to be a part of this. And I mean, my wife and I say it is the journey of breadcrumbs. I mean, just be willing to go, I don't know what the next step is, but as soon as it presents itself, I will in faith take the step, that's been the journey, and it's still the journey. Honestly, like that hasn't changed, because even now we're moving forward in a lot of faith. You know what I mean? Like going, okay, I'm not exactly sure what the next step involved, and do we have money for that next step? I don't know, but we're going to go ahead and just close our eyes and take the step and do take that Indiana Jones sort of, close your eyes, put your foot out, and hopefully there's actually a bridge there. You know what I mean? Like I hope there is,
What do you feel like the people that first said, oh, I think there's something here.
Yeah.
What do you feel like they saw in it that resonated with them?
Yeah. So I think that what they saw was this was something that was taking a chance at telling a story that hasn't really been explored in mainstream media yet, right? They went, wow, like this feels so obvious. It feels so like, why isn't there a
Yes.
narrative that's told this ancient story? And then it's so entrenched in the culture and mythology of, sort of antediluvian, Sumerian, Mesopotamian, ancient Near East.
Yeah.
But for as much as we feel that ancient reality, it's not something that's explored in Hollywood all that much. Hollywood has spent a lot of years tapping Greek, tapping Roman, and tapping Egyptian mythology, but it has not spent a lot of time tapping Hebrew, Sumerian, ancient Mesopotamian. So it feels oddly fresh, even though it's some of the oldest cultures in the world. It feels oddly fresh to, I think, a Hollywood ecosystem. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And that it is something that I go, I can't believe this got made, but it's also, you're right. It seems obvious. There's a myriad of, whether it's for children, young adults, and adults, about Greek mythology. There's so much of that out there that even just from a mythological, like, can we take myth and put it on a screen in a way that's really appealing?
Yeah.
This seems obvious. It also, I wonder how much thought you've given to, like, I've got advanced degrees in theology, so obviously I'm going to nerd out about this. But there also seems to be a range of people that have kind of gotten into, have you thought much about the overlap between people that are just, maybe they're like into like ancient aliens. Maybe they're into the sort of stuff. I mean, you can go on some fascinating YouTube. I'm not encouraging this, but you can go on some fascinating YouTube rabbit holes by just typing in Nephilim into YouTube.
I think that's what's interesting about it, right? Like, that's what, oddly, I think it's just that it's like perfect timing almost. I think that this idea happened right at the moment when the idea of things like the Anunnaki and Sumerian gods and Canaanite gods and Hebrew gods, these things are they seem like they're at the forefront of internet culture, right? Biblically accurate angels and all of that, right? Nephilim. This is something that Hollywood hasn't yet tapped. I don't know why. Like, why aren't there any? How come there's a million movies about Egyptian gods, but nothing? Name a movie about the Anunnaki. Yeah. But a lot. I mean, it's a pretty popular idea right now. Like, I mean, I think most people, if you say Anunnaki, a lot of people are out there being like, oh yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about, right? And so, like, I think it's just like, it's like this timing just happened to be right where it is. And again, it's balancing that just right. Like, I think that because you move ever so slightly into too historical, and you got people that are going, oh, this is weird. And it's like, you're trying to teach a wrong Bible. And it's like, no, but I think for the most part, like, and I think it's been the Lord who's led us here to just be right on the thing, right on the razor's edge of being fictional and fantasy, and yet enough, like, I don't know, pedigree or whatever you want to call it to make it feel like, okay, like these guys have done their homework. They're really working hard to make this, to make this feel like the source material is honest, and we're paying the right homage. We're not just cashing in, on a word like Nephilim. We're doing our homework.
Yes.
Right. And we're trying to pay homage to the texts that those ideas come from. Yet we're trying to create a truly, truly fresh fantasy mythology.
Well, Jason, I could talk to you for hours about this, and we'll have to have you back on as we get
I
closer.
hope we've gotten something that is some semblance of something
No,
you can work with.
this is awesome. I would be I'd feel bad if I didn't get to ask you this question if you've got a little bit more time. You
Yeah.
know, my daughter, who's an aspiring artist, I showed her even your Instagram page, which I think you can kind of even trace even on your Instagram page, like a lineage almost of the visual ideas for this. And when I see you present your character designs and your designs for something even like a Nephilim,
Yeah.
what that looks like. Can you talk about your process of character design and
Yeah.
and how did you even, you know, because when I first picture like a Nephilim, I'm picturing like Goliath of Gath.
Yeah.
You know, I'm picturing a very human, and there's obviously humanoid features about it. So could you talk a little bit about your character design and then maybe some ways you know, younger aspiring artists that they could maybe be inspired by your process and how you come
Yeah.
up with designing characters like this?
Yeah, for sure. The process has been really fun, and we've actually talked about a lot about Gabriel and how, you know, I really wanted to figure out how to, like, again, reading the book of Enoch, but even looking at the way that the Malachim, right, in the Old Testament, when they show up, we want to put robes and we want to dress them according to, like, you know, Superbook, you know what I mean? Or even like,
Yeah.
you know, Ben-Hur
Sure.
or the Ten Commandments. We want to make them in this, but if they are who the texts are saying they are, these are hyper advanced beings, right? These are as the current, these are non-human intelligences that are for whatever reason being given scope and regency in our world, right? And they're being allowed to manifest in some way in our world. And to think that they're showing up in the same clothing, right? And so I wanted to think about it that way. I wanted to think about, like, Gabriel and the other guardians or the other celestials. They needed to feel both ancient, but also somewhat outside of time and also somewhat advanced, right? And I actually thought that Marvel did a great job with Thor, with this Asgard and the way that they interpreted. So a lot of my influence came out of, you know, honestly, like, I think Thor and the vision of Thor and the way that those artists and filmmakers have interpreted Asgard as both this thing that was ancient from our perspective, but also advanced and celestial and otherworldly, but also kind of alien and like sci-fi. I really thought that was such a great, they struck such a great balance. And so for the Celestials, I really looked at what I think is Ryan Meerding. He was the one of the main designers for the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and also just like the way that they approached Thor, I thought was great. Because what happened with Thor, I think, is Marvel created a fictionalized version of Thor, right? Really, that it's not. This is not the historic. This isn't even the mythologically historic.
No.
Thor. This is some version of Thor. He has the name Thor, but it's a new fictional character, right? And so I really that's where I began to think about how to do Gabriel. It's like, I want to use the name Gabriel, but I don't want to be tied to the way that Christians think about an angel. And so, like, when you begin to think about how do you design that character? How do you present that character? How do you say, you know, this is a fictionalized, you know, interpretation of a mythic, legendary being that shows up in multiple, you know, cultures and mythologies. But here's what's cool about Thor. Here's what's really cool about Thor. Marvel brought that actual historical, not historical character as in he lived, really lived, but this character that exists in historical literature. Guess what? My kids wanted to go and read Norse mythology when the Thor movie came, right? So they watched Thor and then they had questions and were inspired to go to the library and grab books about Thor and Norse mythology. And I'm going, man, if that's all that happens here, if we inspire a bunch of kids to go and grab, the book of Genesis because we go, hey, we're inspired by the book of Genesis. And they go, man, I got to learn more about these characters that inspired this. I mean, to me, that's the idea. So anyway, I'll get back to your question though. That's the Celestials. As for the actual Nephilim in our story, I mean, I really, really, really wanted to pull from Sumerian design. I mean, I really wanted to root it there. So, while I wanted it to feel fantasy and we're trying to take everything one step. So it was like, it felt very easy to just make these Nephilim like Goliath, like a Canaanite warrior, like a giant. I wanted to, like me and David, like we really wanted to push it even further and go, how were the Sumerians imagining their gods? What do the statues of Sumerian gods look like? How did Gilgamesh look? Right.
Oh, yes.
And like, so let's pull from those masks, if you go and look up Sumerian masks, you're going to see some similarities to what we're doing.
Okay. Because now I'm picking up on something, and now tell me if this is intended or not, because there is that kind of interpretive tradition too, that is seeing both these sons of God and the Nephilim as both the offspring of celestial beings, for lack of a better term, and yet a connection to human kings, because in that Sumerian culture in the ancient Near East, you have the human kings as these are the representatives. They are sons of God too. Yep. So are you saying, like, conceptually, you're actually trying to grab specifically from that cultural conception of this, like, kind of messiness between kings and gods? And
for sure. Yeah. I mean,
that's brilliant.
So we have a theme, and we have an idea in the story, and they're called the crowns of rule and reign in our story, in our mythology. Ea created the crowns of rule and reign. So not only do we have the seeds, but we have these crowns of rule and reign that were made for mortals. Only mortals can wear the crowns of rule and reign. But these fallen beings, these Anu, as we call them, the Anu, they're the defected regents of the celestial realm that now want to rule Ara. They want the crowns, but they can't wear them. They literally don't have the genetics to put the crowns on their head and rule, right? So what do? They create proxy beings, right? So that they can rule through their sons, right? Their genetically created offspring. That's kind of where we're going with some of it.
Dude, oh my gosh, this is so brilliant. I love that connection. I mean, that makes so much sense, because yes, there does seem to be, it's weird, but there does seem to be like rules baked into the cosmic order. And there does seem to be a way in which you can break some rules, and then some rules you can't break.
Right.
And so the malevolent forces throughout the biblical narrative are finding ways of breaking the rules.
Almost loopholes, right? Like,
loopholes. There you go.
Hey, well, we can't do this, but we can do this. How? Look, the whole the Eden narrative is a loophole. It has to be. There's like if God intended for the mortals to have the rule and reign and jurisdiction that they have, like, why is that serpent in there? What in the world is that?
None of that makes sense.
What is that? What is Nakash doing in the garden? Right? Yeah. Like, Nakash is exploiting something, right? That's our interpretation. I'm not saying, I'm just saying, like, that's why we move over to fantasy, right? That's why, because I want to explore my thoughts around that, right? I'm not saying that's what the scripture is saying. I'm just saying.
Totally. But there's a flip side to it too, Jason. There's a flip side, and you get into the early church fathers and the way they think about what we would call atonement, and you get into like the ransom theory of atonement, which I'm not saying is the only lens of reading what happened on the cross, but you definitely have early church fathers which are going, hey, there was a loophole here.
Yeah.
Where God in the flesh could conquer sin and death and take the reign away from the fallen principalities and powers through this loophole.
If there
I'm not
wasn't
saying
a
that's
loophole,
it.
no, if there wasn't a loophole, then there would be no defecting, right? There would be no dark principalities, as Paul puts it, right? Like your battle's not flesh and blood. Your battle are the fallen principalities and rulers, right, of darkness. Now, how did those guys fall? Right? If they didn't have the ability to go against the will of God, how are they doing what they're doing? Right? Like, so anyway, that's part of the idea. And, you know, just between us, the idea with those crowns of rule and reign is that, you know, we wanted to create a scenario, a messianic scenario, right? Where only a mortal could come and actually put on those crowns, right? Only a mortal can. But mortals have not, they've fallen, man. So what does Ea need to do? What is the answer here? If only a mortal can wear the crowns, you know, I'm speaking, you know, in our end game, right? Is this idea that, well, then Ea is going to have to go down and be a mortal and do it. Put on those crowns himself.
So you've got you have one season right now. Is it
one
all
season
wrapped, ready to go?
No,
Not yet.
We've got one episode. Okay. So help us out. Let's make this the rest of this show. We've got one episode. We've got the full season written.
Yep.
We've got half the season recorded, and we have storyboards and animatics ready to go. And so if this episode pops off and is gangbusters, we're going to be moving forward with the whole thing.
Okay. So first of all, when will that first episode be out? When can people find it? And those that are listening to this, I go, no, this whole thing has got to make it to the finish line.
Yeah.
What are the ways people can get connected, find it, discover it, support it?
Yeah, I would say a couple things. Like, our episode is going to be launching on the Angel app, which is pretty much anywhere, any TV, any device, you can get the Angel app. It's on Roku, it's on, you know, whatever. And so go and get the Angel app and watch the episode. February 12th is when that's launching. And then, you know, go and follow us on our socials on Instagram, and you can go to GabrielandTheGuardians.com to watch the trailer, and you know, go bug Angel. Tell them this has to get made, right? Send them messages and, you know, let them know, like, hey, I watched the episode. I think it's awesome. You guys got it. You know, let's greenlight the rest of the season.
Awesome. We'll do. Everybody, you heard that. If you're fascinated by this at all, and even you just want to take a flyer on it and you go, well, I don't know, I haven't seen anything yet, but this sounds interesting enough to see where this goes. I would encourage you, follow those steps. I'll be reaching out over at Angel Studios and telling them, you guys got to make this thing happen. It might be the next Narnia. It might be the next Silmarillion here. I'm super excited, Jason. Again, I could talk for days. Maybe we can find a time again when we get closer to the release date, where maybe we can do a little first episode debrief and discuss for those that are following along and have tuned in, where we can I'll maybe get some questions from the audience to try to pick their brain on, well, what did you see? And we could hear it, maybe the thoughts directly from the creator himself. This has been awesome, Jason. Thank you so much.
Thank you, man.